There's a special kind of cold that has nothing to do with the winter snow. My name is Hailey Simmons, and I felt it the moment I stepped into my family's estate for Thanksgiving. The air was thick with the scent of roasted turkey, but also with lies. My brother Noah was the charming heir praised for his leadership. I was just the quiet daughter, the one good with spreadsheets. But those spreadsheets were screaming. I found inconsistencies, gaps in the reports that pointed to a dark secret. I was torn between the family's demand for a perfect holiday and a moral line I couldn't unsee. How long could I stay silent? Stay with me as this story unfolds. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The scent of roasting turkey and cranberry sauce should have been comforting, a nostalgic anchor to Thanksgiving's past. But as I sat at the polished mahogany table of my family's estate, the twinkling white lights strung along the windows felt less festive and more like a glittering cage. The air was thick, not just with the aroma of cinnamon and pine, but with a tension so palpable I could almost taste it, a bitter undertone to the sweet potatoes. I'd been home for 2 weeks ostensibly to help with the family business through the holiday rush, but mostly because I needed a break from the cutthroat grind of my finance job out of state. Now I wasn't so sure it had been a good idea. My return had been met with the kind of strained politeness reserved for distant relatives, not a daughter. My brother Noah held court at the head of the table, his voice booming over the clinking of silverware. He was recounting with cinematic flair a recent acquisition he'd supposedly spearheaded. My father Walter watched him with a look of uncomplicated pride, soaking in the narrative of the heir apparent. Noah was all charm and blindingly white smiles, a perfectly curated image of success. And that, Dad, is how we secured the mid-Atlantic distribution, he concluded, raising his wineglass. To a Simmons family Christmas that'll break every record. Oh, Noah, that's just brilliant. My mother, Clara chimed in, her voice dripping with adoration. She turned her smile on me, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Hailey, it's just so sweet that you're home to help. I'm sure you were wonderful with the spreadsheets back in the city, but Noah, well, he just knows how to lead people. It's a gift. I felt the familiar sting, the casual dismissal that had defined my entire life. I'd spent 3 years managing a 7-figure portfolio, but here I was, still the kid sister, good for sweet things like balancing the books. I just nodded, taking a sip of my water, my gaze drifting to the preliminary Q4 reports I'd reviewed last night. The numbers hadn't looked brilliant. They'd looked creative, inconsistent. I'd spent my first week back buried in the company's financials, trying to reconcile the glowing projections Noah kept spouting with the actual cash flow. There were gaps. Small at first, but they were there: unusual vendor payments, assets leveraged against high-risk short-term ventures I couldn't find any documentation for. I'd chalked it up to sloppy bookkeeping, a side effect of Noah's big-picture leadership style. But a cold knot of dread had been tightening in my stomach ever since. I was observant. It was my primary survival skill in this family, and my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. My phone buzzed silently in my lap beneath the napkin. I glanced down, shielding the screen from my mother's prying eyes. It was a message from Lucas Hartman, my former mentor and the sanest man I knew in the finance world. Hailey saw the Simmons name pop up on some unusual secondary market filings. Looks like high leverage on an unsecured holiday venture. Smells like your brother's brand of cologne. Be careful. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the draft from the bay windows. Lucas didn't do idle gossip. If he was worried, I should be terrified. My vague unease just crystallized into sharp, cold fear. This wasn't just sloppiness, it was potential mismanagement. I looked up. Noah was laughing at something my father said, the picture of filial devotion. My mother was already discussing Christmas decorations. I felt torn. This was Thanksgiving. It was the sacred kickoff to the holiday season, a time for gratitude, and above all, family harmony. That was the Simmons way: appearances over everything. To bring this up now would be to detonate a bomb at the dinner table. It would be an unforgivable breach of decorum and attack. I couldn't do it. Not yet. I needed hard evidence, not just a gut feeling and a cryptic text. My moral responsibility warred with a lifetime of conditioning to stay silent, to be the sweet one. I'd wait. I would dig deeper quietly. Dessert was served: pumpkin pie with a mountain of whipped cream. As the plates were being cleared, Sarah, our family's housekeeper of 20 years, approached Noah discreetly. I only caught it because I was already watching him, cataloging every micro-expression. "Mr. Simmons," she murmured, her hands clasped tightly. "I'm sorry to bother you, but the catering staff, their check for the deposit hasn't cleared. They're very worried about their holiday payroll." Noah didn't even turn to look at her. He waved a dismissive hand, his voice laced with annoyance. "It's Thanksgiving, Sarah. Handle it. Don't bother me with trivialities." He turned back to my father, laughing at a shared memory. I watched Sarah's face crumple, the quick flash of humiliation, before she smoothed it over and retreated to the kitchen. He hadn't just dismissed her. He'd dehumanized her. And just like that, my internal conflict vanished. This wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet or risky investments anymore. It was about people. It was about the callous disregard, the arrogance. The first seed of cold, sharp outrage began to bloom in my chest, right next to the fear. Noah wasn't just incompetent, he was cruel, and he was using my family's name to do it. The days following Thanksgiving blurred into a frantic secret audit. I locked myself in the guest room, supposedly catching up on old work, but in reality, I was deep diving into the company servers, fueled by the cold anger Sarah's humiliation had ignited. The inconsistencies I'd glimpsed before were now gaping wounds on the balance sheet. I found them: unauthorized expenditures, massive wire transfers to shell corporations I'd never heard of, capital draws against the company's line of credit that far exceeded any projected need. Noah was liquidating assets to fund something big, something risky, and he was doing it fast. It wasn't just mismanagement. It was a systematic gutting. He was treating the Simmons Company, our father's legacy, like his personal piggy bank, and the holes he was digging were getting deeper by the day. That Saturday, my parents hosted their annual pre-Christmas gathering, a mandatory affair for local business partners and community leaders. The estate was decked out in poinsettias and velvet ribbons, a string quartet playing softly near the grand staircase. Noah was in his element, a glass of expensive scotch in hand, captivating a small crowd by the fireplace. I stood in the doorway, nursing a club soda, listening. "The Winter Radiance campaign is going to revolutionize the holiday market," he boasted, his voice smooth and confident. I knew this campaign. It was the high-risk, tech-infused luxury decor line Lucas had warned me about. It was the vortex sucking all the company's capital. "We're projecting a 40% increase in holiday revenue," Noah continued, flashing his politician's smile. A local bank president nodded approvingly. I felt sick. He wasn't projecting, he was gambling. He'd bet the entire company on this launch, using funds that weren't his all, while standing in front of a 20-foot Christmas tree. I slipped away from the party, the sound of polite laughter fading behind me. Back in the guest room, my hands were shaking, but not with fear anymore. It was rage. I started copying files, encrypting them, saving everything to a secure external drive. I documented every unauthorized transfer, every request that bypassed standard approval protocols. I took screenshots of the leveraged accounts and the corresponding venture proposals, which were paper-thin on logistics and heavy on buzzwords. Then I called Lucas. "It's worse, Lucas," I whispered, staring out the window at the softly falling snow. "He's drained the operating accounts for a vanity project. It's leveraged to the hilt." Lucas's voice was grim but steady on the other end. "Okay, Hailey, you're not an employee right now. You're a witness. Document. Don't confront, just gather. You need an impenetrable fortress of evidence. This isn't a family squabble anymore. It's a legal matter." He was right. My old strategy, a quiet intervention, was dead. This was damage control. A wave of nausea hit me as I looked at the calendar. Christmas was just 3 weeks away. This was the season of joy, of family, of corporate bonuses and holiday parties. What I was holding on that encrypted drive wasn't just a business discrepancy. It was a scandal. If I exposed this, I wouldn't just be stopping Noah, I'd be destroying the Simmons name. I pictured the headlines, the whispers at the Christmas Eve service. My father's reputation, my mother's standing in the community, it would all be incinerated in the fallout. Was I really capable of doing that to my own family, regardless of what Noah had done? I was trapped between the holiday's demand for peace and the evidence demanding justice. My thoughts went back to Sarah the housekeeper, then to the catering staff whose checks had bounced. That was the thread. I pulled the vendor manifests for the last quarter. I saw the names of local businesses, small suppliers, who had probably extended the company credit based on my father's decades-old reputation. The landscaping company that decorated the town square. The local shipping hub that employed half a dozen of my old high school classmates. They all depended on the Simmons business. If Noah's Winter Radiance campaign failed, and my analysis showed it was almost guaranteed he wouldn't just take the family down, he'd take a chunk of the community with him right before Christmas. My dilemma shifted. It wasn't about protecting my family's reputation. It was about protecting the people they were responsible for. I needed air. I left the encrypted drive hidden in the lining of my suitcase and walked downstairs. The party was winding down, the last of the guests trickling out into the cold night. I headed toward the kitchen but stopped short at the sound of hushed, urgent voices from my father's study. The heavy oak door was ajar. It was Noah, and to my shock, my mother. "It was a temporary setback, Mom," Noah was saying, his voice stripped of its usual charm, tight with a frustration I'd never heard before. "The supplier in Asia folded. It's a cash flow issue, nothing more." I froze, pressing myself against the dark wallpaper of the hallway. "Noah, you promised me." Clara's voice was a low hiss, sharp with anxiety. "You promised me that Ashes of Yesterday was handled." Ashes of Yesterday. Another project. "It is handled," Noah snapped. "I moved the funds from the pension reserves to cover the loss. Dad doesn't need to know. It'll all be replenished when Radiance launches. It's fine." My blood turned to ice. Pension reserves. He wasn't just gambling. He was stealing. He was covering a failed deal. "Good," my mother said, her voice stabilizing, regaining its composure. "Then it's settled. We just need to keep things calm for your father until after the holidays. I'll handle Hailey. She's been nosy." I clapped a hand over my mouth, stifling a gasp. It wasn't just Noah. My mother knew. She was complicit. She was protecting him. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was absolute. I stumbled away from the study door, my mother's voice, "I'll handle Hailey," ricocheting in my skull. The betrayal was absolute, a cold vacuum that sucked the air from my lungs. It wasn't just Noah's recklessness anymore. It was my mother's active, calculated complicity. They were stealing from the pension reserves, from the future of people who had given decades of their lives to this company, and they were doing it to cover another earlier failure. The time for quiet observation was over. The time for merely gathering evidence was over. This was an active, ongoing crime, and my silence was a form of agreement. My paralysis shattered, replaced by a cold, surgical fury. I wouldn't just watch them burn the company down. I was going to stop the blaze. I went straight back to the guest room, my hands steady as I unlocked my laptop. My finance training took over, a cold, logical process that suppressed the emotional hurricane. I dove into the company's internal servers, following the digital breadcrumbs of the transaction Noah had mentioned. There it was. A massive unauthorized debit from the employee 401k holding account wired to a shell corporation I recognized from my earlier digging, the one tied to the failed Ashes of Yesterday project. It was arrogant, sloppy, and grotesquely illegal. He was counting on the holiday rush and his own unchecked authority to keep it hidden. I dug deeper, cross-referencing the budgets for his Winter Radiance vanity project. Just as I'd suspected, the line items for marketing and consulting were ludicrously inflated. It was a slush fund. With a series of precise keystrokes, I initiated an internal transfer, moving the exact amount he had stolen back into the pension account. I coded the transaction as a Q4 intercompany reconciliation, clerical error correction. It was a massive risk. If their IT team traced the IP, they'd know it was from inside the house. But it was done. The immediate disaster, the theft from the employees, was averted. It was an invisible act, a silent correction in a sea of red ink. But for me, it was the first shot fired. My heart hammered against my ribs. I realized with chilling clarity that staying passive was no different from helping them. My mother had drawn her line in the sand, choosing her favored son over ethics, over legality, over me. I was truly alone in this. I packed my encrypted drive and drove to a small, nondescript coffee shop 2 towns over. Using a secure connection, I called Lucas. He used the pension funds, Lucas. I said, my voice low, the words tasting like ash. And my mother. She knows. She's covering for him. I just moved the money back. Lucas was silent for a long moment, and I could practically hear him processing the new stakes. Hailey, he finally said, his voice grim. You did the right thing. It was the only moral move. But you've just poked the bear, and you did it in his own cave. He won't know what you did, but he'll know something is wrong. He'll feel the loss of control. He'll get paranoid. This is when men like him make mistakes. He paused. Your strategy has to change. No more small fixes. You are no longer trying to save him. You are building a case. From now on, you only watch, you document, and you let him run. We need calculated moves, not emotional ones. Restraint is your new weapon. I returned to the estate. The next morning, the atmosphere at breakfast was electric with unsaid things. Noah was pacing the dining room, his jaw tight, a phone pressed to his ear. He hung up with a sharp jab of his finger and rounded on me. What did you do? He spat. My father, Walter, looked up from his newspaper, startled. Noah, what on earth is the matter? Noah's eyes were laser-focused on me. I'll tell you what's wrong, Dad. Hailey's been helping in accounting. I just got off the phone with finance. Our systems are a mess. Reconciliation flags everywhere. He gave me a look of pure condescension. Hailey, I know you mean well, but this isn't some small-time portfolio in the city. This is a real complex business. Maybe it's best you just enjoy the holiday. Your help is costing us time and money. He was painting me as an incompetent meddler, publicly undermining my confidence in front of our father. He couldn't admit he'd been caught moving pension funds, so he attacked my competence instead. Noah, that's enough. My father started, though his voice was weak, already seeking peace. Clara immediately stepped in, placing a perfectly manicured hand on Noah's arm, a gesture of solidarity. He's just stressed, Walter, she cooed, casting a warning glance at me. Hailey, darling, you know how much we love having you home, but Noah is under immense pressure. The most important thing always is family harmony. She looked me dead in the eyes. This rigid insistence on how things should be done, it's not helpful. Family is about loyalty, about being flexible for the good of the whole. Surely you see that. Her words were a silken threat, a direct command to back down, to choose family harmony over business ethics. My intervention, though secret, had been felt. Noah, bolstered by our mother's defense, straightened his tie, his arrogant mask sliding back into place. She's right, and I won't let minor distractions derail the most important launch in this company's history. He looked from me to our father, a triumphant smirk on his face. In fact, I've decided to move up the Winter Radiance showcase. We're hosting a holiday gala, Christmas Eve. It will be the biggest event this town has ever seen. We'll invite every investor, every partner. We'll show them exactly what Simmons' success looks like. He stared directly at me, a clear challenge in his eyes. He wasn't just setting a stage for his triumph, he was setting a deadline for my silence. The Christmas Eve gala was a ticking clock. Noah's announcement had turned the estate into a whirlwind of frantic preparations, and for me, it had turned a marathon into a sprint. I had less than 3 weeks to build an unshakable case. My investigation intensified, becoming a grim obsession. I worked late into the night, fueled by coffee and a cold fury, digging past the surface-level embezzlement and into the foundational rot. I found what I was looking for in the archived files for the Ashes of Yesterday project. It wasn't just a failed deal covered by pension theft. It was a ghost. The entire venture was built on fraudulent contracts. I found loan agreements with signatures that didn't match my father's collateral pledges against assets the company didn't even own. Noah hadn't just made a mistake. He had committed forgery and bank fraud long before the Winter Radiance project was ever conceived. He was a career criminal hiding in plain sight, protected by his charm and our family name. Confident in his own impunity, Noah's hubris swelled with every passing day. His public attack at the breakfast table had just been a warm-up. I'd gone into the main office needing to access the hard-copy personnel files when I found him holding court with several senior-level managers in the open-plan workspace. He spotted me, and a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He cut off his own sentence and gestured toward me, drawing the attention of the entire room. "Ah, Hailey, taking a break from your spreadsheets," he called out, his voice dripping with condescension. The managers turned to look at me. "We're in the middle of a high-level strategy session for the launch. It's all very complex leadership stuff. I'm sure it would just bore you." He chuckled, and a few of the managers followed suit, their laughter nervous and subservient. "In fact, I just saw the catering team arrive. Why don't you run down and make sure they've spelled Simmons correctly on the ice sculpture? That seems more your speed." I felt a dozen pairs of eyes on me, felt the hot flush of humiliation. I was being dismissed as a child, a party planner in front of the very people whose livelihoods I was trying to protect. The holiday setting, once a source of tension, was now a weapon. The estate was suffocating in decorations, a constant, glittering reminder of the facade we were all maintaining. In the office, the pressure was amplified by the company's annual charity traditions. A large, brightly colored banner in the lobby proclaimed the Simmons Cares Holiday Drive, where the company matched employee contributions to a local children's fund with the grand total to be announced naturally at the Christmas Eve gala. I felt a familiar, sickening lurch. On a hunch, I traced the accounts. Noah hadn't just drained the operating funds. He'd been siphoning the employee contributions and diverting the corporate match into the Winter Radiance slush fund. He was quite literally stealing toys from orphans to fund his party. The sheer, shameless villainy of it took my breath away. That evening, I went looking for the original forged loan documents from ashes of yesterday, the physical evidence I'd need. I went to my father's study, to the heavy oak filing cabinet where he kept all original contracts. The file was gone. My heart hammered. I accessed the security logs for the private office, a system I'd helped my father install years ago. There, time-stamped just 2 days after my secret pension fund correction, was the entry Clara Simmons. 11:03 p.m. Access granted. My mother. It wasn't just passive knowledge. It wasn't just verbal defense. She was actively, physically destroying evidence. She was his co-conspirator. The last flickering ember of hope that I could save her, that she was merely misguided, died. She had chosen. The betrayal was absolute, a cold, sharp blade twisting in my gut. I was truly, completely on my own. I couldn't fix the forgery, not without exposing everything prematurely. But I wouldn't let him steal from the charity. I made another covert move, a small, defiant act of triage. I found an overfunded executive travel budget, one Noah clearly used for personal trips, and executed another clerical error correction, transferring the full matched amount into the Simmons Cares charity account. It was a drop in the ocean of his debt, but it was a win. It was my win. I also took a preemptive strike to protect the community. I saw he was using a new high-end audiovisual company for the gala, leaving a massive unpaid balance with the local vendor the company had used for 20 years. I sent an anonymous email to the new vendor from a dummy account, a concerned former employee, warning them of Simmons's severe cash flow issues and advising they demand full payment up front. I knew Noah couldn't pay it. It was a small piece of sabotage, a logistical grenade tossed into his perfect party plans. This wasn't enough. I reviewed the final plan for the Winter Radiance launch, the one he'd be presenting at the gala. It was all there. He was leveraging the company's final assets on this single night on a product line that was already failing in pre-orders. He'd structured the deals so his new management team, his cronies, would receive massive success bonuses the moment the launch was announced, long before any revenue came in. But the rank-and-file employees, their holiday paychecks and bonuses, those were contingent on the launch's actual success, which would never materialize. The gala wasn't just a launch, it was a meticulously planned bankruptcy. He was going to pay himself and his friends, and then leave the employees, the company, and my father's legacy to burn on Christmas morning. I stared at the screen, the evidence of his plan laid out in cold, hard numbers. My decision was made. This was no longer about stopping him. It was about surgically removing him. I had to decide just how far I was willing to go to save everyone else. Christmas Eve arrived, not with a sense of peace, but with the cold, metallic click of a clock counting down. The gala was the stage, and I was no longer an observer. I was the stage manager, and I was about to burn the entire production to the ground. The grand ballroom was a masterpiece of my mother's denial, draped in silver silks and overflowing with white roses, the air thick with the scent of pine and expensive perfume. A string orchestra played festive carols, a sickeningly sweet soundtrack to the impending implosion. I stood on the mezzanine overlooking the floor, dressed in a simple, severe black dress that felt like armor. I'd spent the last 2 weeks in a crucible of anger and sorrow, mourning the family I thought I had. The discovery of my mother's complicity, her active removal of evidence, had severed the last thread of hope for a simple resolution. There was no saving Noah. There was only containing the blast radius. My resolve had hardened into something cold and pure. I would not let them turn me into them. I would not act out of spite or emotional rage. I would act with the surgical precision of a financier, using the very tools they had underestimated in me. My integrity was the only asset I had left, and I would not leverage it. Lucas had been my anchor. Our calls were no longer about moral support. They were tactical, a war room briefing. "You have 3 points of leverage, Hailey," he'd said last night, his voice a grounding force over the secure line. "Legal, financial, and familial. The legal evidence, the pension theft, the charity fraud, is your bomb. The financial leverage, the account triggers, is your detonator. And the familial leverage? That's your father. That's the one you can't predict." We had built the trap meticulously. The financial strike was first. Using a temporary admin access I'd granted myself weeks ago, I had embedded a script in the Radiance accounting software. The moment Noah's presentation triggered the launch marker in the system, a series of automated alerts would go directly to the fraud department of our corporate bank, flagging the massive pre-scheduled bonus payouts to his cronies as catastrophic irregularities and freezing the primary operating accounts. His victory payment would be stopped dead. The legal strike was the data bomb. I had compiled everything into a secure data room: the ashes of yesterday forgeries, the 401k transfer logs, the siphoned charity funds, the list of unpaid local vendors, and my own grim analysis of the Radiance project's inevitable bankruptcy. An email was queued, set to send at 8:05 p.m., 5 minutes into Noah's speech, to every major investor, the remaining board members, and the regional office of the SEC. My calculated moves were ready. I descended the staircase, the orchestral music swelling. The ballroom was packed. I saw community leaders, bank presidents, and the very vendors Noah was planning to ruin, all of them sipping champagne, oblivious. Noah was the center of it all, of course. He was standing near the stage, his confidence at a fever pitch, his voice carrying easily over the din. He was boasting about the Radiance technology, using buzzwords like synergy and immersive holiday experience. He was electric, a magnetic vortex of charisma and lies. He caught my eye across the crowded room, his gaze lingering for just a second. He didn't just look confident. He looked triumphant, as if my presence was a final amusing joke. He had no idea what was coiled in my hand. I moved through the crowd, my heart a cold, steady drum. I found my father Walter standing near the towering Christmas tree, looking every bit the proud patriarch. My mother was beside him, her hand linked through his arm, her smile brittle. "Hailey, darling," she said, her voice a silken warning. "You look severe. It's a party, try to enjoy it." I looked past her to my father. This was the familial leverage, the last unpredictable domino. Dad, I said, my voice low and clear. I need you to know that I love you. He looked at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. I love you too, Hailey. What's this about? A bell chimed, signaling the start of the presentation. Noah's about to begin, Clara said, pulling at his arm. Walter, let's get our seats. The lights dimmed and a spotlight hit the stage. Noah strode out to a wave of applause, his smile blinding. He tapped the microphone. Good evening, everyone, he boomed. Welcome. Tonight, you're not just going to see the future of Simmons Incorporated, you're going to see the future of Christmas itself. The crowd laughed, charmed. All eyes were on him. My phone vibrated in my clutch. 8:00 p.m. The triggers were active. The account freezes were armed. The data bomb was 5 minutes from detonation. I watched Noah, my brother, the man who had stolen from his own employees and forged his own father's name, as he prepared to deliver his victory speech. The crisis was no longer impending. It was here. And so, Noah said, his voice booming with false sincerity, his champagne flute held high, I ask you to raise your glasses with me, to the Winter Radiance campaign, to the future of the Simmons name. The ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. I watched him bask in it, a conquering hero awash in the warm golden light. My clutch vibrated. 8:05 p.m. The email was sent. The data bomb was live, hurtling through cyberspace, landing in the inboxes of everyone who mattered. It was time. I set my jaw, left my untouched champagne flute on a passing tray, and moved. Not toward the door, but toward the stage. I walked up the small set of carpeted side stairs, my footsteps silent. Noah blinded by the spotlight, and the adoration didn't see me until I was at the secondary lectern, the one intended for my father. I tapped the microphone. A sharp, piercing shriek of feedback sliced through the applause, cutting it dead. The room fell into a disorienting silence. Every eye swiveled to me. Noah whipped around, his triumphant smile frozen, melting into a mask of pure confusion, which quickly hardened into incandescent rage. Hailey, what in the hell do you think you're doing? Get off the stage. His voice was a low growl, but the mic picked it up. I saw my mother Clara rise halfway from her seat, her face a pale mask of sheer, unadulterated shock. Not shock that the truth was out, but shock that I was the one delivering it. My father Walter just looked bewildered, his hand frozen midway to his glass. You gave a wonderful speech, Noah, I said, my voice ringing out, amplified, cold and clear. It didn't tremble. But you forgot to mention some of your other projects. Hailey, I'm warning you, Noah hissed, stepping toward me. She's had too much to drink, folks, he said to the crowd, attempting a charming, dismissive laugh. It died in his throat. I'm not drunk, Noah, I said, turning my gaze from him to the stunned audience. I'm just finally balancing the books. My brother calls Winter Radiance a success. What he failed to mention is that it was funded by illegally transferring capital from the employee 401k pension reserves. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. He also failed to mention the Ashes of Yesterday project. I continued, my voice gaining strength. A complete failure he covered up by committing bank fraud using forged loan documents in our father's name. I looked at my father. His face crumpled, a devastating, visceral portrait of betrayal. He looked from Noah to me, his eyes wide with a dawning complex horror, and I'd never forget it, a flicker of conflicted, agonizing pride. He was watching his daughter burn his legacy to the ground to save it. You're lying, Noah roared, lunging for my mic, but I was faster. Am I said, projecting past him. He also forgot to mention the Simmons Cares holiday drive. He has been systematically siphoning the employee contributions and the corporate match your money, the money for the children's fund to pay for this party. That was the final blow. The murmur in the crowd became a roar, and just as Noah screamed, "Liar!" for the second time, the second part of my plan detonated. All at once, the ballroom lit up with the blue-white glow of cell phones. My 8:05 p.m. email had landed. I watched as investors, board members, and local bank presidents simultaneously pulled their phones from their pockets, their eyes scanning the subject line, opening the encrypted attachments. The evidence was corroborating my speech in real time. I saw a major investor in the front row look up from his phone, his face white with fury. "It's true," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "The 401k transfers. It's all here." Noah froze. The blood drained from his face. He scrambled for his own phone, jabbing at the screen, desperately trying to access the corporate accounts to initiate the bonus payouts to his cronies. I knew what he was finding. Red alerts. Access denied. Account frozen. My script had worked. The bank's fraud department had been triggered the second he tried to move the money. He was locked out. "You," he whispered, his charm vaporizing, revealing the raw, cornered animal underneath. "You bitch!" He lunged at me, his hand raised not to grab the mic, but to strike me. Event security, finally realizing this was not family drama, swarmed the stage. Two men intercepted Noah, grabbing him by the arms. He fought them, his tailored suit twisting his face purple with rage. "She's lying. You can't believe her. She destroyed everything." But his words were drowned out by the rising chaos of the crowd. People were shouting, moving toward the exits, or clustering in angry, panicked groups. I stepped back to the microphone, my heart hammering but my voice steady. "The company is not bankrupt," I called out, my voice cutting through the panic. "The company is under criminal mismanagement. As of this moment, the assets are secure and have been frozen by the bank to protect them from him." I looked out at the sea of shocked faces, the vendors, the employees. "Your payroll is safe. Your pensions are safe." I had stabilized the bomb. Noah was still screaming as security dragged him kicking and struggling toward the service exit. "You're finished, Hailey!" His voice echoed back into the ballroom, hoarse and desperate. "You're dead. You destroyed this family." I stood alone on the stage, the orchestra silent, the glittering white roses and silver silk suddenly looking cheap and cold like decorations in a morgue. I looked at my father, who was staring at the empty space where Noah had been utterly broken. I looked at my mother. She wasn't looking at my father. She was staring at me, her eyes void of shock, void of sorrow. They were filled with a cold, pure, unadulterated hatred. I had won. I had saved the company. But as I stood there under the harsh lights, I realized Noah was right. I had just destroyed my family, and I had absolutely no idea what, if anything, would be left standing in the wreckage. Christmas morning, I woke up to silence. The house wasn't filled with the sound of carols or the rustle of wrapping paper, but a heavy, oppressive quiet. The gala was over, the bomb had detonated, and the fallout was immediate. My day was not spent by the tree. It was spent in my father's study on a non-stop series of conference calls. I was on the line with lawyers, the shell-shocked and furious board members, and Lucas, who had seamlessly transitioned from mentor to crisis manager. The aftermath was a logistical nightmare that I was uniquely qualified to navigate. My first act was to verify the transfer I'd made to the Simmons Cares Fund. It was secure. My second was to authorize payroll, ensuring every employee from the executives to the catering staff Noah had stiffed would be paid in full before the new year. The company, though bleeding, was not dead. We issued a curt press release. Noah Simmons had been removed from all operational duties, effective immediately pending a full internal and external audit. His reputation wasn't just tarnished, it was a smoking crater. The local news camped outside our gates was already calling it the Christmas Eve massacre. The holiday decorations, which had seemed so festive just 24 hours earlier, now looked grotesque, like garish makeup on a corpse. The magnificent tree in the ballroom drooped its lights, casting a hollow glow on the half-empty glasses and discarded napkins from the party. The scent of pine and roses was soured by the lingering smell of stale champagne. This was accountability. This was renewal. It was ugly, and it was necessary. I didn't see my father until late Christmas night. I found him standing by the fireplace, staring into the cold, empty hearth. He looked ancient. The auditors will be here tomorrow, Dad. I said, my voice soft but firm. He nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the ashes. You were right, Hailey, he whispered, his voice thick. All these years, I was watching the wrong child. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was an acknowledgement, a seismic shift in our family's tectonic plates. He had finally seen my competence. He had finally seen Noah's poison. Clara was a different story. She had locked herself in her suite. She didn't reassess her favoritism. She entombed herself in it. She was grieving the son she had enabled, and she was nursing a white-hot hatred for the daughter who had dared to hold up a mirror. In the week between Christmas and New Year's, I worked. I didn't celebrate. I didn't rest. I processed the immense, crushing weight of the betrayal, not with tears, but with spreadsheets and legal briefs. Every fraudulent transaction I uncovered and handed to the auditors felt like a eulogy for the family I thought I had. This was my emotional reckoning, a cold, clear-eyed acceptance that the warmth I'd craved had only ever been a façade. My growth hadn't been a gentle unfolding. It had been a violent shattering. I had been underestimated, and that had been my greatest weapon. The remaining board members, grateful that I had saved the company from total liquidation, formally offered me the position of interim CEO. I looked at the offer at the corner office that would have been Noah's at the throne I had technically won, and for the first time in my life, I felt the sharp, clean joy of personal freedom. No, I told them, I won't be CEO. I will be a paid advisor, but only through the transition. I'll help you find his replacement, I'll oversee the restructuring, and then I'm going home. I wasn't going to be defined by their mess. My agency was in choosing my own path, not inheriting a broken one. The house was slowly being stripped of its holiday pretense. The boxes of ornaments and garlands were stacked by the door, ready to be put back into the darkness of the attic. Noah was out on bail, his assets frozen awaiting a trial that would be swift and brutal. My father was preoccupied with the legal teams, a man adrift in the wreckage of his own denial. I was packing my own bags, preparing to head back to my life, when I felt her presence. My mother. She was standing in the doorway of the dining room, her first appearance in days. She was impeccably dressed, her hair perfect, her face a mask of cold composure. We hadn't spoken a word since I took the stage. She hadn't screamed, she hadn't cried, she had simply watched. Now she just stared at me, her eyes devoid of warmth, two chips of Arctic ice. The final confrontation, the one that had nothing to do with money or business, but with a lifetime of wounds, was here. It was New Year's Day. The house was finally mercifully quiet, stripped of its gaudy holiday pretense. The last of the decorations were packed away, leaving behind only the faint scent of pine and the stark, clean silence of the snow-covered estate. I was in the grand entryway, my suitcase by my feet, zipping up my coat. The battle was over. The crisis was contained. The auditors were deep in the wreckage of the company's financials, and I had spent the last week working with the board to create a bridge to the future. My flight back to my own life left in 3 hours. I was done. I looked up, sensing a presence, and found my mother standing in the dining room doorway, just as she had been days before. But the Arctic hatred was gone, replaced by something I couldn't name, a hollowed-out exhaustion, a profound and terrible grief. "So you're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am," I replied, my voice neutral. We stood in the silence, the chasm between us, a mile wide, filled with the ghosts of Christmas Eve. This was the reckoning. "You destroyed him, Hailey," she whispered, her voice fragile, all its silken strength gone. "He was my son. He was my brother." I said, my own voice quiet but unyielding. "He was a thief. He committed fraud, Mom. He stole from people who trusted this family, who trusted Dad. He would have destroyed everything, including you." "And what did you do?" she countered, a flicker of the old fire returning. "You saved the spreadsheets. You saved the employees. You threw your own blood to the wolves." I gripped the handle of my suitcase. This wasn't a choice between my brother and the spreadsheets. It was a choice between right and wrong. I chose. He chose. And you chose too. Her perfectly composed face finally crumpled. A single difficult tear tracked through her makeup. He was always so fragile, she stammered as if that was an excuse. He needed me. He needed protection, I finished for her. He didn't need protection, Mom. He needed boundaries. He needed you to say no. I saw it then. This wasn't the beginning of a true reconciliation. That was years away, if ever. But it was a crack in the ice. It was the first agonizing moment of clarity in her life, the realization that her protection had been poison. She finally saw, if only for a second, what her favoritism had cost. She turned and walked away without another word. My father appeared from the study pulling on his coat. He had seen the exchange. He looked weary, but his spine was straight for the first time in weeks. He walked over to me, ignoring my suitcase, and put his hands on my shoulders. "The board is implementing every structural change you recommended," he said. His voice was rough, but his eyes were clear, and they were fixed on me. "The lawyers believe that because of your immediate transparent actions, the company will avoid liquidation. You saved us, Hailey. You saved the legacy I was too blind to protect." He pulled me into a hug, a real one, not the hollow gestures of my childhood. "I am so proud of you. And I am so deeply, truly sorry I didn't see you." I hugged him back, a knot I hadn't even known I was carrying finally dissolving. "I know, Dad." "What will happen to Noah?" I asked, pulling away. My father's face hardened, the new pragmatic steel settling in. "He'll face the consequences. His lawyers are negotiating a plea. He will not be a part of this company, ever. But he is still my son. He will not be utterly abandoned." It was the perfect balance of justice and family, a balance I had fought for. I nodded. My professional resolution was set. I had formally declined the CEO position, my name already signed on a contract as a high-fee strategic advisor for the next 6 months. My independence was non-negotiable, but I would not abandon the stabilization I had started. I felt a surge of clean, quiet empowerment. I had made my choices moral and strategic, and I would stand by them. I picked up my bag. "The car is here," I said. My father walked me to the massive front door, the same one I'd walked through weeks ago, feeling small and overlooked. I stepped out into the bright, cold air. The sun was brilliant, glinting off the pristine, untouched snow that covered the grounds, a fresh, clean slate. I looked out over the horizon, the world white and new. I felt the immense, aching relief of moral clarity, the sharp, clean air of personal freedom. I was no longer the daughter in the shadow. I was the one who had walked through the fire, and I was the one who had decided what was left to save. I turned, gave my father one last nod, and walked toward my future. And with that, Hailey walked away, finally closing a painful chapter of her life. What did you think of her decision to expose everyone at the gala? We truly value your perspective and read every single comment. If you appreciate stories of justice and empowerment, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.